For those of you who don't know me, like Mr. Kinzer said, my name is Holand Christensen, and I graduated from Regis last year. I've been attending Noah Webster College, as he also mentioned, that of course he and Mrs. Kinzer started, and I'm pursuing a degree in English with the ultimate goal of being an author. For those of you who do know me, which there are lots of you, I'm just so glad to be back with you. I've missed all of the Regis classes and all of you wonderful people. And I just wanted to encourage you all to really enjoy Regis while you have the chance, because it's special, and I know that you don't think you'll miss it when you graduate, but you will. So enjoy it. And enough reminiscing. I actually didn't come to talk to you about me. As Mr. Kinzer was saying, I came to talk to you about someone who's very special to me in my life, and that's my grandfather, or Poppy as I call him, and his name is Wayne Barber. And some of you may know that he pastored here at Hoffmantown for many years, but I'd actually like to go back farther to talk about something that he did before he was here at Hoffmantown, and actually before many of us were even born. From 1946, which is of course right after World War II, until 1991, the Soviet Union held many Eastern European countries in bondage to communism. The whole area of Eastern Europe was actually said to be under the Iron Curtain because it was so isolated from the rest of the world. And one of these countries was Romania. And it was here that my grandfather went in an almost undercover mission to share the gospel with the Romanian people. And I have a picture for you all of a map of Romania so you can see kind of the countries that surround it. I know probably a lot of people don't know where Romania is. I didn't until I started going there. And it was actually considered a satellite country during the Cold War, which basically meant that the Soviet Union had come in and imposed their communist rule on the people and on the country. The communist dictator of Romania is this guy, and his name is Nicolae Ceausescu. And after years of oppression and violence, he and his wife Elena were finally overthrown by a revolution of the Romanian people in 1989. Ceausescu was responsible for the deaths of many, many people in Romania, and he almost single-handedly ran the country into the ground. The communist regime really brutally crippled the people of Romania. I've been to Romania, as I mentioned, and as some of you know, and I've gotten to see the leftover carnage of a country that was held in bondage to communism. Romania is still recovering from years of oppression and violence, and the people are struggling to catch up to the countries that are around them. Remarkably, many areas in Romania don't even have running water or many of the basic amenities that you and I consider commonplace. The results of communism are staggering. And I thought, if the Romanian people are still so oppressed today, we can only imagine what it must have been like under Ceausescu. So let me tell you, from the perspective of someone who was there, which is my grandfather, what it was like in Romania behind the Iron Curtain. As I talked with my Poppy about his story and thought about what he said, it really struck me that there were 3 different sections you could divide his story into. And I felt that my grandfather had a received mission, a revolutionary message, and a remaining ministry. I wondered, and I know that you all might too, how someone even gets involved in something like going incognito into a communist country to share the gospel. And really the only answer that I have for that is that the Lord ordained my grandfather's ministry, because it was never something that he went looking for, it was something that the Lord brought to him. He heard a message by a pastor whose name was Joseph Ton about Romania and the country and what the people were going through. And he told me that he listened to it over and over and over again. And actually for 5 years he felt burdened for the Romanian people before the Lord raised up the opportunity for him to go. And one Sunday while he was preaching, he mentioned Romania and his desire to go there in his sermon. But little did he know that Mia and Costel Oglice, who were a Romanian couple themselves deeply involved in Romanian ministry in the country, were in the audience that day. And after the sermon, they approached my grandfather and they asked him if he really wanted to go to Romania. And it was from that point on that my grandpa's burden became a reality. They made trips in 87, 88, and 89. And if you remember, the revolution occurred in 89, but their trip was prior to the revolution. Trips were anywhere from 21 to 27 days at a time. And they traveled all over Romania to different cities to meet with the churches and pastors they were working with. These cities included Bucharest, which is the capital, as well as Cluj, Oradea, Timișoara, Serduk, and many others whose names I won't even begin to try to pronounce. Costel and Mia were trying to get into the Romanian churches to share with them the gospel and teach them how to study the Bible. So they also took on these trips a woman named Dory Van Stone, and she was a missionary who had spent the majority of her life in Irion Gyra working with the cannibals there. So she went with them as their missionary, and then she would share her testimony with the Romanian people. My grandfather went as their pastor because at this point, having a pastor along on a trip like this would lend credibility to Mia and Costel, and the Romanian churches would accept them and see that they knew what they were talking about. At this time in Romania, over 1,200 Baptist churches had precept, which is the Bible study method that Mia and Costel were teaching, and they had these materials in their church. One time they rented a center in Brasov where there was a ski center, and they were able to kind of rent something like a community center and have the pastors come there, and they taught them there about the Christ life. But most of the time they did travel from church to church, and they ended up picking 5 specific pastors that they trained. And they basically discipled these men and taught them about the word and how to teach the word themselves. And it ended up that these 5 pastors became the leaders of the church movement in Romania, as well as becoming involved in the government, actually, many of them after the communist revolution. Eventually, they did build a conference center in Serduk, where they were able to have all the pastors and other people come there and teach and learn. And then they also do this in Bucharest. And so I have a couple of pictures. I was talking about the revolution, and this is Timișoara Square, which is one of the biggest squares in Romania. And as you can see, it's just filled with people that were protesting, and in the days following this, it turned very violent, and the army actually fired on the people with tanks, and all sorts of horrible things happened. And this picture shows this man has the Romanian flag, and at this point in Romania, the Romanian flag is yellow, blue, and red, but it had the communist insignia in the middle, and so the people, when they would protest, they cut out the communist insignia, and then they would wave the flags during their protests. And this is my grandpa, just so you all know what he looks like and who I'm talking about. And I believe we decided that he was standing on the crest, so he is here in Albuquerque in that picture. And then this is what I was just talking about. This is the Precept Center in Serduk, where most of the conferences take place. So for the Romanian people, my grandfather had a revolutionary message. His main message that he's taught his entire life has been about grace, and he calls it living grace and focuses on Christ's life in and through us. The Romanian people are primarily Orthodox in religion, and as my grandfather puts it, they were really steeped in legalism. This was something that they deeply understood. The message of grace was so contrary to what they knew that when they heard it, it just took them aback, and they would latch onto it, and it would set them free. I asked my papi what sort of opposition they faced while they were there, and he shared with me that it was really constant opposition during their trips. When they went, they actually never all stayed in the same hotel, and they didn't know where the others were staying, so they were all separated. And they were followed by the secret police everywhere. Their hotel rooms were bugged and all sorts of really crazy things. My grandfather has an amazing sense of humor, and he told me that he would actually wave at the secret policemen that were following them through the cities. And the secret police would watch him through the television in his hotel room. And he knew that, so he would put a towel over it while he got ready. And then he said that when he was finished getting ready and he was about to have some downtime before he needed to go somewhere, he would go and sit down in front of the TV with his tuna fish and crackers, and he would take the towel off the TV and he would look right at it, and he would say, "Today, we're going to have tuna fish and crackers. Would you like to have some with me?" So it's this amazing sense of humor that got him through a lot of the opposition that he faced. He told me one night they'd been eating with a Romanian family who had driven 100 kilometers to get potatoes because they knew that my grandfather loved French fries and they wanted to make him some. And the Romanian people, this just goes to show, are so hospitable and caring. And when they left this family, there was a car with 4 men in it with no lights on that followed them very closely as they drove away. And the pastor that they were with was in the front car, and then my grandfather and the others were in a middle car, and the secret police followed them out in a third car. And the pastor knew how to get out of the town without going through the roadblocks that were there, because at this point in Romania they had security checkpoints about every 2 miles, and they would stop you and they would search your car and they would ask you all sorts of questions, and they knew that this could be dangerous having that many Americans in a car and having to stop at these checkpoints. So the pastor was going to show them a way out of town that went around the roadblocks. And he turned right at a fork in the road. But the driver of my grandfather's car, knowing that the secret police were following them, ended up going left. And it confused the secret police, and so they followed the pastor. And my grandfather found out right after this that they had a suitcase full of tracts in their trunk. And he told me that just one tract would throw you in prison. So there's no telling what a suitcase full of them would have done. And they had actually forgotten to leave them with the family that they had just been with. And so they were able to stop, and they threw the suitcase into a field because they knew that they could tell the people where it was and they could go back and get it. And once they had done this, they did go back in the direction of the pastor to see what had happened. And they passed him on the side of the road. The secret police had pulled him over, and they were actually holding him at gunpoint against a wall and patting him down. And there were 2 instances that are probably my favorite that possibly involve angels. And my papi would fly into the domestic airport in Romania as opposed to the international airport. And in the domestic airport, which was basically a local airport, they didn't speak any English. And he had to do this once in order to rendezvous with the rest of the team. And he was kind of just hoping that he would recognize the name of the city that he was supposed to fly into over the loudspeakers. And it was called Aradia. But he missed it. And he said that he looked up and he noticed a blonde-haired and blue-eyed woman standing there, and she called him by name. And he had never seen her before, and she had probably never seen him before. And the other interesting thing is that no one in Romania has blonde hair and blue eyes. They are all very dark-haired, and they have brown eyes primarily. So this was very unusual. And she looked at him and she said, "Mr. Barber, you're going to Aradia, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." And she proceeded to tell him that his flight was boarding, and she told him where he needed to go and what he needed to do. And he told me that he bent down to pick up his bag, and when he sat up to thank her, she was gone. And there was no blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman in the airport. And then on this same trip, they were getting ready to go through a security checkpoint in the airport. And Dory Van Stone, who I mentioned earlier, who was the missionary, she was getting ready to go through, and a very tall man all of a sudden stepped out from behind the security counter, and he said, "Dory, I'm here to walk you through." And she said, "Well, okay," and they went together, and he proceeded to walk her through. And when the security people tried to stop and check her bag, he said, "No, she's with me." And he walked her into the area to get on the plane, which at this point was very narrow. If you think about the tunnel things that we go through today to get on the planes, my grandfather said that they were a lot smaller, and you actually couldn't fit 2 people next to each other to walk down them. And he said, though, that this man walked in there with her, and then when she turned to hug him and say goodbye, he was gone. And there were all the people behind her that were about ready to get on the plane, but he was nowhere to be seen. And these are 2 of my favorite stories because I think it's so sweet to think about how the Lord takes care of his people when they follow him. And my grandfather says, "Where God guides, he provides," and it's so true. He also told me about 2 scary things that happened. Once he had been to a church to speak, and the pastor of the church had driven them there, and they got pulled over by the secret police. The pastor had actually forgotten his license, which is what he knew the secret police would want to look at when they pulled him over. And because he didn't have it, it was possible that the secret police were going to come and search their car. And they knew that this was a problem because they had 6 Americans in the car with 6 American passports. And the secret police were actually after the people that my grandfather was with and that he was ministering to, people like this pastor and others. And so they knew that if the secret police caught the pastor with 6 Americans, it would cause lots of problems. So the pastor took the car registration, which is what he knew they didn't want. And he looked at the people in the car and he just said, "Please pray." And so he took the car registration and he showed it to the secret police. And they ended up letting him go on through, and there was no problem. My papi said that it was so tense not knowing what would happen, just sitting there in the car and waiting. Another time, he was supposed to rendezvous with the rest of the team in Bucharest, and he got there early because he wanted to make sure he knew his surroundings, and it was basically a thing where he would just go and they said, well, meet us at this street corner at this time and we'll come pick you up. And he didn't know where they were coming from. So he wanted to make sure he was there early and knew where he was. And he got there so early that he thought he would just do some sightseeing. And so he started to walk around and he got lost. And he knew that this was a problem because he was all by himself in Romania. So he just prayed that the Lord would show him where he needed to be and get him back to where he needed to be. And he said after walking some more and taking numerous turns, he ended up right back at the corner where he was supposed to be, and the people came and picked him up. One of his favorite stories that he told me about was getting to speak to the Romanian parliament. And while Ceausescu was still in power, his wife Elena actually decreed that all of the Romanian Bibles be confiscated and turned into toilet paper. So it turned out that my papi was able to speak to the Romanian parliament in the same office in the palace where she had made this decree. And he was able to tell them about Christ and leave them with their own Bibles. He said there was a huge crowd of people outside that were yelling because they were free at this point, and this was after the revolution. And he was able to tell the parliament that the only way that they would know how to handle the situation was in God's word, and if they would come to Christ. So there are countless stories that I could share with you about my grandpa's time in Romania, and these are just a very few of them. When I asked my papi what we should remember about his time in Romania and about this time period in Romania, he gave me a few things. He thought that an interesting fact was that the Romanian people actually voted in socialism themselves. And it is true that the ballot boxes were most likely fixed anyway, but the people in Romania at this time thought that socialism was going to fix their problems and that it would help them, and they'd been tricked. Another thing that he shared with me was really the refining process of poverty, because these people were very, very poor, and they still are. But this enabled them to not be distracted by things when it came to the message of the gospel. He also told me that the Holy Spirit gives you a boldness when you're speaking his word, a boldness that you don't normally have and that you have despite the fear that you might be feeling. And he said, in fact, there is no fear when you're in the perfect will of God because the fear comes from taking our eyes off of Christ. As I wrap up, I wanted to share briefly with you all about the remaining ministry that exists in Romania. The Precept Center that's on the screen is constantly filled with all different groups of people of all ages that are able to come and learn about the Bible. And I've been able to go to Romania a few times to minister to the people there, and it's truly amazing. It's so neat for me to be able to go back to the same place that my grandfather has been and actually continues to go every summer and be able to continue the ministry that he started. And I have a few pictures for you all. This is a VBS that we're doing in a very poor village in Romania, and the kids are intermixed with our team here. And then this picture is actually at the conference center in Serduk itself, and we're teaching them from the precept books. This is a typical Romanian house. When you walk through the villages, this is what you'll see, and it depends on the area. Some of them are more run down than this, and then you also have areas where there are gypsy homes that are actually a whole lot better looking than this, which is a whole story in and of itself. But this is typical Romanian scenery when you're walking through the village. And I wanted to end with this slide, because if you could be praying for the Romanian people, I would really appreciate it, because my grandfather is actually getting ready to go on a trip on April 30th, and then I will be at the Precept Center right after him with a team from Hoffmantown in June. And the people of Romania are still in bondage in so many ways, and they need your prayers because they need the Lord. And children just like these beautiful little guys on the screen who have nothing need Jesus. So what can you all do? Obviously, I know that not all of us can go to a communist country and share the gospel with the people there. But what we can do is surrender to Christ daily and allow him to live through us. My challenge to you all today is to remember the grace message, which, as my grandfather puts it, is recognizing that I can't, and he, God, never said I could, but he can, and he always said he would. And also remembering to let Jesus be Jesus in you. So I would appreciate if you all would pray with me. Lord, I just thank you so much for today, and I thank you for the things that we learn in your word. And I thank you that we can come together as a group and learn about this time period in history. Lord, for the Romanian people, I pray that you'd continue to be with them, Lord, that you would be working in their lives and in their homes and in their country. And Lord, I thank you for this group of Regis students and for how hard they work. And I pray that you would be with them as they go about the rest of their day, that you would just bless them, Lord, and bless them in their studies. And I ask that you would just continue to grow all of us in you and draw us closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen.